Hello and welcome to another special Anne Diamond interview here on Viking.TV. You never quite know when you're on a cruise who you might meet, and isn't that half the fun? I've met fascinating fellow passengers, from midwives, builders, businessmen, writers and architects to military vets, sailors, winemakers and commercial airline pilots, but never yet a career diplomat. My guest today has been just that, in a fascinating profession that's taken him all over the world. And that's where I feel I should have bumped into him from time to time, because actually he's been where I've also been at the same point in history, just occasionally. For instance, we could have met at the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, where I was reporting on that amazing moment in time, and he was working in the British Embassy as a political advisor. Perhaps you have bumped into him, though, aboard Viking cruises, where he's spoken about his life and times, his many books, and topics as varied as organising foreign visits with royals to the career of Robin Hood. So please meet now Alan Charlton, joining us now from his home in England, I think, yes?
Yes.
And it's lovely to see you, and I'm sorry we haven't bumped into each other before.
Well, my loss, Anne.
Now, many diplomats, as I've always understood it, are what we Brits call public school and upper middle class of background. Usually there's a family history of diplomatic or political professions, but not so you. You were what we call an 11+ kid. Can you describe for our largely American audience what that is?
Yes, yeah, well, you're right. They are largely American audiences. I've noticed that. There was a time between the end of the Second World War and up to the middle of the 1970s, roughly, when there was an opportunity for people from more modest backgrounds to go forward to schools which were kind of semi-independent. So I had a scholarship to a school in Nottingham High School. From there, it was a highly academic school, and that propelled me into university. So I became the first person in our family ever to have a university degree.
Wow, well done. What did your mum and dad do for a living?
Well, my dad was worked for the co-op. He was a butcher, and my mum was at home. So you know that was a normal thing in the 50s and 60s, really.
But as a youngster, sitting what we call the 11+ exam, I was an 11+ kid as well. Did you have any particular ambition to the sort of career that you ended up having?
You know, people often ask me that question, and no idea. No, I mean, I suppose like a lot of children, I was happy-go-lucky and took one step at a time, and didn't really occur to me when I was 11 what I might do when I was, say, you know, another 15 years on.
You did get to Cambridge University there, didn't you? What did you read?
Well, I did modern languages, though one has to say modern languages at Cambridge in those days wasn't much about the language. It was more about literature and philosophy.
Yeah. But you still had to be able to speak the languages.
Yeah, well, I'd spent I'd spent 6 months before in Germany working in a bank as part of a course arranged by one of the wonderful German political foundations. So my Bavarian German was very good, perhaps a bit shocking for people in Cambridge at the time. But I didn't think much of their German when I got there, the professors, I have to say.
Well, yes. Well, that's interesting. We'll go on to talk about that, because I know that you do love learning different languages and becoming fluent, but you have your own way of doing it, not necessarily the classroom style. Didn't you train to be a teacher?
Yeah, I did. When I was leaving university, you probably had the same thing. You think what you're going to do. And my first thought was, well, become a teacher, you know, teach languages. That would be good. So I thought, no, let's join the diplomatic service and go around the world. I like travel. I like foreign places. So I went for that first. I got through the first stage of applying for the diplomatic service, and then changed my mind again and went back to teaching and did what we call, you'll be aware of it, the postgraduate certificate of education. This is something which graduates in Britain then go for a year just to train to be a teacher. And once I'd done that, I decided actually to go off and teach in Germany, because there was an opportunity. There was a great shortage of teachers in Germany at that time. And so I got a contract with one of the German states and taught in a school in Germany for 2 years.
And is that when you decided that was your life and you get married and start to have a family?
Well, we'd already got married. In fact, I got married just as we left university. So wife was with me for that. And but I decided after I'd done 2 years there, which was the contract, they offered to support me to do a postgrad degree in linguistics. So I did that. And while I was doing that, I decided actually I wasn't very good at teaching. I enjoyed it, but I couldn't keep the children under control. So I went back to the first thought and applied for the diplomatic service. And I've always maintained the fact that I was completely relaxed about it probably helped, because there are, as you can imagine, many, many thousands of people who apply for a handful of jobs. And somewhat to my amazement, they gave me a job and I found I liked it and stayed for 35
I tell you what, it's not just a big decision for you. When you're already married and starting a family, it's a big decision for your wife too, isn't it? Because I can imagine being married to a diplomat means that basically you're going to travel the world, according to him, according to his career.
You're quite right. I mean, and later in life, I had a time as the Foreign Office HR director. And that's precisely what I used to say when chairing the final interviews for people who wanted to get into the fast stream or people who wanted to transfer in from business, say, have you thought about the impact on your friends and family? And it is something you have to take into account, and we just found the least bad solution every time. I mean, it is an issue, and you can't deny it.
Reading up about you, was it then when you were still in Germany teaching, or was it when you were off getting your first diplomatic position that you caught typhoid?
Well, actually, it was in the summer holidays before I started in the Foreign Office, and my wife and I, and then a group of friends from university, we'd gone driving around Portugal and Spain, staying in campsites and so on. And we'd all caught something when we were out there. We all got dysentery, and so we knew we'd had that. But when I got home, I started feeling odd, and I did manage to get into the office the first day or two. But eventually, cut a long story short, I couldn't get there, and I was diagnosed with typhoid and sent to hospital, to an isolation unit for best part of a month, where I had the wonderful sensation of everything I touched being burnt afterwards. So everything came on cardboard plates and plastic forks, and the bed linen was, and I was in this glass cage basically. So people who visited me got on the phone outside the glass cage and talked to me. I lost a lot of weight, which was interesting. So I had to, in the second half of my time there, try and beat myself up. So I got through a lot of boxes of chocolates, for example.
Well, that's the way to do it, to beat typhoid, I guess. But I mean, that's a grim reminder before you'd even started your job traveling the world that, you are going to remote parts in some cases.
Yes.
And what was your first diplomatic position?
Well, the norm is, I think still is, that you spend your first period actually in London. And I was in the West Africa department. You just get allocated something. But that had an anomaly in that we had our embassy to Chad, a small, well, kind of large actually, but not heavily populated country in Central Africa. And so I went out a couple of times as the second secretary to Chad. With our head of department was the ambassador, and the deputy head was the number two, and I was the second secretary. And I used to have to write letters in French to people about embassy business. Not that there was a great deal. So my first experience really of being a diplomat was going over to Chad. And the memory I particularly have is that for some reason we decided we were going to go across the river. There's a river Shari there that divides Chad from Cameroon. And on the other side in Cameroon, there was a village called Kuseri, which is probably now a major town, but then it was quite small. And we had an honorary consul who helped us arrange this. And we went over by log. By log, yes. We went over in a cutout log. And we had sort of hippos around us at the time. So that was an interesting introduction to diplomatic missions.
Well, exactly. You can't be trained for that. You've got to learn that on the job, haven't you? I mean, I always think maybe it's a bit like being a journalist in that you can't train for some of these things. You can't even prepare yourself. Oh, do I speak French? Can I get on with the West Africans or whatever? You've got to go out there and then absorb it very, very quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. You need a lot of flexibility, and I think people ask me what does it take to be a diplomat, and well, there are all sorts of diplomats, but I think the major thing is curiosity, and that would be shared with reporters, I think.
Yeah, and that's of course before the days of mobile phones and WhatsApp groups.
Absolutely, yes. It's amazing how we ever got anything done, really, isn't it?
I don't know. None of us know, actually. But you obviously, as you've said before, you loved learning language. And at some point you decided Arabic would be a good one to learn too.
Yeah, well, it was fairly normal then. I think still is now that when you join, as part of the tests you have to take is a language aptitude test. And as I'd just been studying phonetics, I think I got the highest ever mark in this because I could write down all the sounds they were throwing at me, which I think probably was Sanskrit or something like that. But it didn't matter. But I could write them down in script and reproduce them. All it showed is that I'd studied phonetics. It didn't show actually I was any good at languages. But anyhow, they believed after that I would be the right person to study a so-called hard language. So in those days, you could opt for things, but you never got them. It was a bit like being in the army. So I opted to do Chinese because it was the days of ping pong diplomacy. You know, it's all very exciting. So I got a call back a couple of months later saying, "You'll be delighted to hear you're learning Arabic." So that was that.
But it's interesting you opted for Chinese because that's very much about the ear as well, isn't it? The phonetics, the different sounds. Why do you think you're good at learning language?
Oh,
I mean, are you musical, for instance?
No, I'm not. Not really. No, that's more my wife's side, who've got a great line of opera singers and things like that. But I don't have any of that. No, I think I think languages is 95% interest and hard work. I think there's maybe 5% that your brain works in the right way, but you know, I think anyone can do it, but you have to be motivated and interested. Of course, the more languages you learn, you kind of get into the swing of it in a sense that you sort of kind of understand what you need to do.
But we were all taught at different stages in our own education what would be what priority you should put on learning certain languages. I remember when I was younger, everybody said you must learn German. You always must learn French. And if you can learn German, because Germany is becoming a very, very big deal indeed. And then they started to say Chinese, and then they started to say Japanese. You couldn't keep up with the number of foreign languages that were being prioritized. Is that what your experience was?
Well, I mean, there are lots of languages, obviously, that are useful. And what's the biggest change in my lifetime has been the spread of English. I mean, the fact is that wherever you go in the world now, English is the lingua franca. So if you have a group of people, international people in a room, whether from any place in Europe and most places in the Americas and in Asia, then they will speak English with each other. That's the way it is. And that wasn't true 40 years ago. So this is a major change, nothing to do with Britain, it's to do with the United States, of course. So that's changed, and so languages in that sense are not quite so important, but they are important to a diplomat because even though when I started learning German, certainly the older generation of Germans didn't speak English. Nowadays, almost all Germans speak good English, some extremely good English. But you have a different conversation if you speak in that language. You know, I have the example of my brother-in-law, for example, who used to work for Alcatel. And Alcatel is an international company, but based in France. And he found that when he went to the headquarters in Paris, what really mattered was the discussion in the canteen. And there they spoke French. They might well speak English in their board meetings, but when it got down to it, the real things, you needed to speak French. And I think that's true in diplomacy too, that you have a different conversation if you can speak Arabic or German or Portuguese, even if the people there speak reasonable English. So I'm still a great advocate for languages and think they're very, very necessary in diplomacy.
Learning them yourself, yeah. It makes me think, I mean, you've already mentioned Beirut in Lebanon, I mean, obviously Syria. Doesn't it, in your long career, doesn't it break your heart when a place you knew once, where you knew the people and you were able to, get involved in their hospitality and make friends? Doesn't it break your heart when that all breaks down in some sort of civil war?
I know what you mean, but actually I knew Lebanon and Syria at times weren't particularly good either. I mean, there was already a Lebanese civil war in the 70s and early 80s. I was much involved in the 1980s. Now, I saw Sir Terry Waite on TV, who was one of the one of those who was taken hostage, and I was very much involved in that particular matter in the middle of the 80s. As I say, Syria at the time I'm talking about was ruled by an absolutely ruthless dictator who was at that time completely flattening one of his own cities and had put a large number of people in prison in the desert. So, the times weren't particularly good then. I mean, what's happened in Syria in recent years is really tragic and much worse. With Lebanon, what amazes me about Lebanon, its ability to survive. It's a kind of impossible country, but somehow maintains its being. And as you probably know, the Lebanese are all over the world and usually in charge of somewhere because they're very entrepreneurial and very clever people. Yeah, I'm afraid that's it. The difference is Jordan. Jordan is a kind of impossible country. It was just created out of nowhere at the end of the First World War, and no one gave it a prayer of surviving. And it's still around 100 years later, thanks to amazing leadership of only 3 people, really. So that's a kind of lesson in itself. A country which nobody wanted, nobody supported, and somehow survives.
What was it like living there when you were in Amman? Did you have your family with you?
Yes, I had family there, and we had a small son by that time, and our daughter was actually born there, and nearly born on Christmas Day. In fact, she was born 2 days later, so very close to the Holy Land, of course. So it was it's touch and go. We enjoyed it, and in those days the Iranian Revolution was still quite new, so it hadn't had a big impact in terms of the conservative Islamic movement was around, but still it was kind of mixed. So you'd see groups of female university students, some wearing black and some wearing miniskirts in the same group. It was very much at a time of change. And there were more Christians at that time as well, and certainly there were plenty of supermarkets where you could buy anything you wanted, including alcohol and pork and whatever. But that obviously has moved on a bit, but it still remains an amazing place, really.
So you in your job, how do you know? I mean, it's the essence of the word diplomat. How do you know what is the right or the wrong thing to do or say in any situation like that in any particular country? Does someone tell you, or do you have to sort of understand it somehow yourself?
I think on the most, it's understanding yourself by being there. A lot of it's common sense. I mean, sometimes I know when I was in the United States and there were new people coming in, I used to tell people just a few things to avoid, and other things that they ought to make more of. But I don't think anyone ever did that to me when I was in Jordan. I think you just learn it, and people are people in the end, and you learn the environment they live in, and obviously you have to work within that. But there's a lot. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, wasn't it while you were in Amman? I think I've got a picture of a man in snow.
Yes.
Snow. I didn't know you could get snow in Jordan, actually.
No, well, it's a curious thing because there it is. Yes, that was our villa we had. We were very lucky to have this nice villa, and in the second half of our time there, it's about 3,000 feet high, so it doesn't get hugely hot in the summer. The summers are. Our little son, who was, very young, 2 years old at the time, and 3 years old, used to come in every day very early in the morning in the summer and say, "It's a sunny day," to which we would say, "It's always a sunny day," because basically from April until October, it's cloudless blue sky and dry, very, very dry. And so you don't get any moisture except in the other 6 months. And occasionally, as happened with us, because you're at 3,000 feet, you get snow. And as you can imagine, there was considerable chaos because of the snow. When it started melting, our boiler flooded. I spent all night just bailing water out of the basement. And it also while it was there, I was actually at an event at my boss's house. So I parked the car outside on what was a very wide road. And then there was a knock on the door, and there were a lot of police outside, and they basically said, "Does anyone speak Arabic?" So I was the only Arabic speaker there, so I went out, and they say, "There's been an accident." I said, "Oh no!" And then when I got there, I found out it was my car, which had been shunted by a very big police vehicle. So anyway, at one point, someone was saying that I shouldn't have been reversing into them, and I said that was difficult given that I was actually inside at the time. And eventually, I was told by the police chief it was an act of God. So fortunately, the insurance company back home
agreed,
written off.
It's interesting you were talking there about, that at a time when there are hostages and there are terrible things going on. I mean, I remember many of those incidents you talked about, Terry Waite and the hostages like that. I remember sitting back home in my studio doing interviews about how hopeful we were that one day they might be released. And you sort of hold on to the belief that the diplomats are doing their job. But we don't really know what job it is you do trying to organise the release of hostages and trying to quell incidents. What are you doing backstage? Is it just lots of meetings? Do you try and make friends with people who until then were hostile? What can you do in the background?
Well, I mean, obviously, you try and get what information you can. That's the main thing, and you don't get necessarily all that close to the people who are holding the hostages. There's also, this is where the intelligence services often come in, because they hear things that you don't. And quite often, and nowadays it would be much more worse, you get messages which are kind of not genuine. This was before the days of social media and the internet, but you follow some false leads sometimes and get invited to some meetings that turn out not to be anything real. We had a policy which had been decided because of a mess that had been made in the 1970s over a hostage thing. I don't remember Layla Khalid, a Libyan terrorist woman who we did release. And after that, the successive British governments had decided we were not going to do deals with terrorists. So, and when Terry Waite went out, he knew that because we told him.
Yes,
but that doesn't mean you don't try and find them. You don't try and talk to these people if you can talk to them, of course. We had some worrying signs. There was one hostage, Alec Collett, who was a British UN employee, who was killed by his hostage takers, and I had a lot to do with his daughter, and I had to get his daughter to come and look at that video, and his wife lived in New York, to confirm they thought it was him. It was a bit grainy, hard to tell, but the daughter certainly thought so. So that was pretty grim, but I don't think they were necessarily the same people. I mean, I think what was happening was that these people were being held up on the road somewhere in Lebanon or Syria, and then passed on, sometimes sold to people who were interested in keeping them for political purposes. So where they ended up was, kind of who was around at the time and who was prepared to have them. But the amount of time these people spent in captivity was appalling. I mean, this was years and years and years chained to radiators. But fortunately, the other three, Terry Waite, John McCarthy, and now I've forgotten the other name, they did all get out in the end.
I'll remember his name in a minute. He was the Irishman, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. He was. Yeah, they were all fascinating people.
Oh, they were, and we'd more or less given up hope. Their relatives hadn't, but I think the rest of the world had, and that was a wonderful moment.
When we certainly hadn't given up hope. I mean, there was always stuff to do, and always, little leads, and tried to get messages in public or other ways to these people, and tried to influence the people who might have influence on them. But you never knew what was going to work. I mean, we didn't know exactly where they were. We could guess roughly, but we didn't know. So when they were released, we weren't involved in an agreement on the release in any way. They were released because people decided, obviously, that that was enough. That there was no further value.
Mm-hmm. I mean, looking at the other side of your job, but it involves the same problems, doing security assessments, for instance, something like a royal visit.
Yeah.
How on earth do you do that? How do you, I mean, I know that you received the Queen a couple of times, I think, when you were in Jordan. How do you arrange a royal visit?
I was lucky enough to be involved in a lot of royal visits, and that picture is one of Jordan with fine-looking moustache that I had for many years, and my wife next to me in the blue.
Oh, yes.
So I was lucky enough to see them in Jordan, in Germany a couple of times, in the United States, and had a lot of royal family in Brazil, though not the Queen. The assessments are actually done by people in London. So there's various groups who get involved in it, including the security services. And I have to say that in the case of Jordan, I won't go into all the politics of it, but it was a controversial visit. And the weekend before it was happening, and I was sort of the chief organizer in many ways in that time. There was an explosion at the only international hotel then, at the Intercontinental. Now there are loads of international hotels. That was the only one at the time. And so there was a lot of speculation in the media that the visit would be called off because there'd been this bomb explosion quite close to the embassy as it happened, although not close to where the Queen would be staying. She was going to be staying with the King in the royal palace and compound. And I actually remember, and the less good side of your profession, I was badgered very badly by one, I won't mention his name, reporter in a well-known newspaper who said, unless I told him what was happening, my name would be on the front page of the Sunday newspaper, and saying that I was putting the Queen in danger. And I think nowadays I would take that for what it's worth, but in those days I was a little bit nervous about it, I have to say. Still, the visit happened. The Queen was determined to go. I mean, she basically told people saying, I'm going, and, I want to go. It's important. King Hussein is an important person to British diplomacy and for the Middle East peace process. And he's an important person to me, too, personally. And she went, and it was a tremendous success. But there's always that element, of course, of doubt in your minds about what can happen in any country. In Jordan, which had a civil war only a few years before, and was the target of a lot of people who didn't like Jordan for various reasons. Clearly, you had to think about these things. But anyhow, it was fine, and it's good that it happened.
We saw there a picture of you with Hillary Clinton as well. I'm not sure where that one was, but I can only imagine the security surrounding a visit with her.
Well, this was actually in the United States, in Washington, D.C. And it so happened that Hillary Clinton at that time, who was then a senator at that time, after the time of Bill's presidency, George Bush was the president then, and she lived actually almost next door to the embassy. So it wasn't exactly coming in for a cup of sugar, but we did see a lot of her. She was and is an amazingly well-connected person internationally. She knows stuff, knows people. And so we used to talk to her quite a lot, for example, very quietly, about Northern Ireland. She had good contacts with both sides, but particularly with the Presbyterians, the Protestant side, which is something that you didn't always have a handle on, because obviously most people in the US were rather more, on the other side, if you like. So she was really helpful, so we did see quite a bit of her. That was a party, I can't remember what it was in particular. It just happens to be coming out of it, and that's when photos tend to get taken. So I held that one in high regard, because I think she was a very good Secretary of State.
I've got another picture in this lot that you sent me. Actually, I don't understand this one. It's a sort of portrait of the Queen.
Yes.
Well,
this is a bit of diplomacy for you, if you like. Well, this was when I was ambassador in Brazil, and Brazil has a very strong culture of various kinds, and a lot of artists. Their most famous pop artist is a man called Romero Brito. Oh. And he's so famous that during the annual Carnival parade, while I was there, there are always 12 samba schools get involved in the parade, and one of the parade did one entirely based on him. So this is a huge multi-zillion pound effort, because he was so well known, and he still is well known. But I met him and found out that he actually really liked Britain, and he'd been brought up in Recife, which is a place which Viking cruisers go to, and he always remembered as a boy going past the British Consulate General, and always thought what a wonderful thing it would be to go to Britain. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we got in touch with him, and I invited him to be our guest of honour at the Queen's birthday parade. And then he sent me this picture, and what it was, he created this for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. So I sent it to the palace, slightly wondering whether it was the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh's taste, pop art. But I got a very nice, polite letter back, which I was able then to pass on to Romero. And actually, I haven't seen him for a few years, but the last time I saw him, he has a gallery and a factory, in fact, in Miami. while I was there, he said, we were talking, and I mentioned that our daughter was getting married. He said, well, send me a photo of her and fiance. So I did. And then a year later, I'd forgotten all about it. This canvas turns up, this big pop art canvas of my wife and her now husband, which to this day is in their bedroom. It is a rather fine piece, I have to say.
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? When people do that. That's the people you meet. Back to Brasilia, actually. And I think our next picture is of a garden party, I think, at your Brazilian residence.
Well, actually, yes. This was it's a rather grainy one, but when I was going out to Brazil, the novel thing is when you are going to one of the larger embassies, you go and have an audience with the Queen, would now be the King. So I went to see the Queen, and you know, you have a chat, and she talked about her visit to Brazil in 1967 as if it was yesterday. I mean, this is now 2008 we're talking about. Fantastic recall. And then I said, well, actually, your son, the Prince of Wales, is actually coming to visit with his new wife, Camilla, Duke of Duchess of Cornwall, coming to visit us early next year. What's he coming for then? I said, well, he's very interested, Mum, in the environment and climate change. He's coming to visit the Amazon and to give a lecture and to call on the president and urge him to take action and so on. And she said, he's always banging on about that in a normal way. Anyway, so that was actually the visit. And one wonderful story about that. It started with the Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cornwall, coming to a garden party. I had a wonderful exotic garden. The next stop was meant to be going to the presidential palace to meet the president. And then we got a message saying, please delay the arrival of the prince and coming to see the president until we say. So we did. And so the garden party ran on for an extra hour, which was fine. You know, Brazil time is not particularly fixed. And so we got there and we had a really good meeting. It was meant to be a quarter of an hour, and it ended up being about an hour and a half because we found that President Lula was fascinated by the passion of the prince, talking about his issues. Whereas I imagine at the beginning he was probably thinking, well, what do I have to do with someone who is an aristocrat and a prince? You know, I've come from nowhere. But so that went very well. And then I found out why we'd been delayed. It was simply that they'd had a power cut. And they were very embarrassed at the thought that Prince of Wales would arrive and the whole palace would be in candlelight or something because they'd lost power. So that was the reason that they didn't tell me at the time. I only found out later. But the picture you see there is in the Botanical Garden in Rio. And the press, because this was the first time that Prince of Wales had been on an official visit with his new wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, they were desperate for a photo. So the palace staff said, where can we do it? We said, well, perhaps the Botanical Garden, and that's where they did it. And that was the photo the journalists really wanted.
Yeah, well, they were right to get that sort of background because it's an absolutely beautiful photograph. But onto the Berlin Wall, I've got to ask you that because I know you were posted there in about 1986, which means that you were there when the wall came down. And I was there too, again, reporting. Yeah. I would have been under the wall talking to camera. And where would you have been during that time? How exciting or difficult was it?
Well, it was in the years before, I had a lot of visitors of various kinds who came, and I'd take them to, you probably remember, there used to be platforms where you could look over the wall in the centre of Berlin. You could look over to where the old Hitler chancellery was and so on. And people always used to ask me the question, whether they were ministers or parliamentarians or reporters or whatever. They would say, well, do you think this will ever come down? And the answer I always gave, because I believed it, it was, yes, I do, but I've no idea when. I'm often given credit by my German friends when I was rather under the influence of drink, I have to say, at a party the year before, and I said I thought it would come down in the next 10 years, either because the West Germans got tired of the debate over the relationship with East Germany, and there was a kind of formal relationship, and things stuck where they were. Or because the GDR imploded, which is actually in effect what happened, or because the Western Allies got fed up of being sniped at by both sides, by the West than the East Germans and decided, let's give this up. Anyway, it happened rather sooner than anyone expected, but it was an exciting time. I felt every day there was history being made. You know, that was the thing. Something new was happening, and it was just astonishing. I did go into East Berlin a lot before the wall came down, because I was part of the Allied forces, so I had a so-called orange card, which enabled me to get through Checkpoint Charlie without needing a visa. And in the run-up to it, I remember the Gorbachev visit, which is often quoted now on the anniversary of the GDR, and him and Honecker standing together, and then the scenes in the evening, and I stood with the crowd outside where they were meeting, and the crowd just shouted for Gorbachev. And the point of that is they can't be arrested for shouting Gorby, 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 but the message was clear.
We want what
their
he
own
wants.
Guy ought to get out of the way. Yes.
Yeah, and we've got a picture of children at the Berlin Wall. You must expect people to see it so many times, and it did eventually come down. Did you bring a piece home with you?
Well, because one of my jobs really was actually being knowledgeable about various parts of the wall. Of course, the wall went not only in the centre of Berlin, but right round in the countryside to the GDR. And I did go around collecting bits. I had a garage full of the stuff, you know, tons of it. And when it came to leaving later in 1990, I think I left most of it there, to be honest. But I did have a few bits and pieces, yes.
Yeah, no, I forgot. But I always think if I just picked up a piece of concrete and told people, they wouldn't know the difference. Oh, well, there you go. There you go. It's a tiny bit of something that was so dreadful at the time for so long. Tell me about Rudolf Hess. Because
yes, well,
this is a man, I mean, extraordinary, but you did have dealings with him.
I mean, I've certainly used this when I've been on European tours, go to Germany, for example. I mean, the fact was that there were two four-power things involving also the Soviets at that time, before the wall came down, which we did. One was the air regime. So if you came in, as you would have done, on an aeroplane into West Berlin, I was in charge of our element in the Berlin Air Safety Center, which decided whether you could come or not, because we had to get agreement, or at least not an objection from the Soviets, for flights to come in. And only certain flights could come in. They had to be Allied airlines. So it was only, in fact, those days, Pan Am, Air France and British Airways, which flew in. And they had to fly an old-fashioned way. They had to fly at 10,000 feet. Whereas, because in 1945 there weren't such things as pressurized cabins, so that's as high as you flew. But this was rather uncomfortable sometimes, people going into Berlin, and certainly wasted fuel. But anyway, that was one thing we did. But the other four-power thing was the prison. Now, Spandau prison was in the British sector, so it was a particular responsibility for us. But all the four powers were involved in it, and we each had a month. So January was say American month. February was French month, Russian Soviet month would be March, our month would be April, whatever. I can't remember the order, but that's the way it was. So although we had special responsibilities, Brits, for the administration, the taking charge, it was different. And of course, by the time I was there was only one prisoner left, and that was Rudolf Hess. All the other prisoners had left by the late 70s, I think, apart from him. And the Soviets had always insisted that there was no way he would ever be allowed to leave. There'd been a lot of campaigns to allow him out because he was a very old man. But for the Soviets, and I remember I used to talk a lot to the Russians, both in the embassy and the military. We always spoke in German, actually. And they would always say, you know, we remember our 25 million dead, and this man was Hitler's deputy. We believe he should have been executed. We accepted the view of the Western allies that he should be given life in prison. For us, it means life, and there's no way we're ever going to agree otherwise. So that was the situation. And then suddenly in 1987, he actually died. But before that, we used to make visits of inspection, as I imagine people do in prisons. And I remember going with our general, and then he would ask some stylized questions to him, you know, any complaints. He was called prisoner number 7, by the way. You weren't allowed to address him by his name. He was prisoner number 7. Any complaints, how are you, this sort of thing. So yeah, he was just a very old man and spent most of his time, I think, watching football on the TV and in his little garden house in the yard where he was allowed to go in the afternoons.
There was a conspiracy theory, wasn't there, that it wasn't actually him?
There was, yes, which I always found interesting. I mean, there was one or two people who made a lot of money by writing books about this, and there were claims that it couldn't be him because of he was wounded in the First World War, and that his wounds were not as advertised. Actually, he used to go always to the British military hospital, so we knew the situation very well. In fact, he used to be there quite often whenever he had something wrong with him. So we knew exactly who he was. And I always found it interesting that these books still sold, despite the fact that his wife and son who visited him didn't seem to have any problem in recognising him. Yeah. And the one question the one point that someone once put to me, but it's actually the really pertinent one, and said, well, why would he have chosen to stay there all that time if he wasn't the real Rudolf Hess?
Yes.
It's a good point. So I don't think there's much credence to be put in that. But there we are. Yes, he died in 1987 in the end, and his body went back to his family in Bavaria, and I was involved in the arrangements for that. Originally, it was said that his ashes needed to be scattered to the four winds, so that there was no kind of interest in his remains, but he went to be buried in Bavaria. But after the lease ran out in the cemetery, the local authorities said, we're not having this anymore, we've got too many people coming down here we don't want to see, and he was moved on. I don't know where he is now, but he's not in the cemetery where he was for the first 10 years. And the prison was destroyed and the rubble basically put in the North Sea, so no one could pick up bits of it.
Yes, they have to be so careful. How extraordinary, though, for you to have actually met him, someone so close, evil. Now, let's move on to Brazil, because you were there from, 2008 to 2013. How exciting was that? Because that seems to be a very high point of your career to you.
It was a great time for Brazil, too. I mean, Brazil's fortunes always go up and down. The Brazilians, when things are going well, they say, well, just wait a few years, you'll see. And when things are going badly, they just say, wait a few years and you'll see. And they're right. I mean, things go up and down. I mean, that picture was Brasilia. Brasilia, as people will know, I think it was a planned city. Built in the shape of an aeroplane, the original bit. You can't really tell from there, but that was actually the fuselage, if you can see there, and there were wings on the outside you can't see. The idea being that in the 1950s, when this was planned, that this was the future, was the aeroplane, and so it needed to be a modern place. And a lot of countries have had this idea of building a new federal capital somewhere in the interior of a very big country. You get it in Australia with Canberra, get it in Nigeria with Abuja, quite a few countries. And so this idea had been around for a long time. And then one President Kubitschek, came into office saying, we will build Brasilia in 5 years. Well, he did open it within 5 years, and there was some fair bit built, but of course it took a lot longer to build all of it. But still, Brasilia was open for business in 1960, and they only started turning the earth in 1955.
And your official residence was in Brasilia, wasn't it?
Yes, it took a while for the Brazilian authorities to force all the diplomats to leave Rio and come up to Brasilia. But by the time I was there, they had achieved that. And so this is a picture of my terrace and a bit of the garden. It was a place that had a wonderful climate, and it's where the government was and a lot of the institutes, but it wasn't Rio, and it wasn't Sao Paulo, and it wasn't any of the other cities. So it had its pluses and minuses, put it that way.
Yes, yeah. And we've got a lovely picture of yours of Rio, I think, from Corcovado.
Well, that's right. Yes. So that's up where the Christ the Redeemer is, looking over towards Sugarloaf Mountain. Yes.
And then this one of Christ the Redeemer statue from a helicopter.
Well, this is one of the things about being a diplomat. I had a government minister. I think it's someone whose name will have been totally forgotten by now, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, I fixed for her to have a helicopter trip, and they took us round the top of Christ the Redeemer. So that was the photo I took at the time.
I mean, I did not know they would let helicopters go that close, but it's the most amazing photograph, isn't it? Absolutely fantastic to have seen him up close.
Yes.
And there are the Opera House, I think. Is this also Rio or is this Brasilia?
The Opera House is in Manaus. So if you go up the Amazon, and I have done a couple of cruises up the Amazon, Manaus is the only city in the Amazon, and it has this amazing opera house, which was built about 1900, at a time when Manaus was the richest city in the world. The reason for that was that there was a great boom in, obviously, in things like bicycles, but also the auto industry was starting up in Europe and in US, and nobody had any rubber for the tires. And so the Amazon became the place from which to export rubber. And it all went through Manaus, being the only city, and then went by ship to wherever it needed to go. And people, the businessmen there, became incredibly rich. And so they built this opera house, which is made out of entirely imported materials, sort of metalwork from Britain, marble from Italy, you know, everywhere. And they just shipped it all in and built this amazing thing. And there is a film called Fitzgeraldo, if ever you get a chance just to see a clip of it, which has Klaus Kinski and Claudio Cardinali in it, where the first scene, they're rowing over the Amazon and go into the opera house where Caruso is singing in 1903. And it's just something you don't expect in the middle of the largest forest in the world. You've got this opera house, which still functions.
It does.
And quite a few famous people have been there over time.
And now my next picture, I don't fully understand, but I gather there's a real story of diplomacy behind this gorilla.
Ah, yes. This gorilla is called Idi. And when I used to travel around the country, of course, and one of the most important states in Brazil has 27 states, is Minas Gerais. It's the old part of Brazil. If you ever want to look into Brazilian history and see the colonial period, that's the way to go. Anyhow, I went to see the governor there and the mayor. And then the mayor said to me, we have an issue, and it's not a normal diplomatic issue. We wondered if you could help. That we have a gorilla in a wonderful park, and it was a wonderful park, and he's been there for quite a long time. He was given to us from the wild 20 years ago, but we would very much like to get involved in further Idis being born, and we understand there is a foundation in Britain, and we've been in touch with them, which with the basically gorillas in captivity, having young gorillas. And would you be in touch with them and tell them that we are bona fide people, and you know, this ought to happen, and so on. And he's really important to his idiom. When all the school children go on there with their clipboards, everyone's visit. He's one of the most famous people in our own whole state. But he needs a mate. So I said, well, it is an unusual issue, and I won't be able to do this for you. You know, I can talk to them, but they will make their decision on whatever grounds. I made a couple of phone calls, and didn't know whether it was going to happen, but it did happen. And in fact, 3 young lady gorillas did appear from Britain eventually and went with Idi. And I was given huge credit for it. You know, you'll know this, Anne, from your career. You get blamed for all sorts of things you're not responsible for. So sometimes to take credit for things that really you're not responsible for, you may as well, you know. So I went along to see them, and that was fine. The story ended slightly sadly in that although he seemed to get on with these lady gorillas, who were much smaller than him and younger, he actually died a couple of years later without issue. But I think they've since brought in another male gorilla. And anyhow, I've lost track of the story. But it just goes to your point that you have to be flexible.
Yes, yeah, and very diplomatic, obviously. I'm going to whiz past your Washington career, which seems such a shame because I could talk to you all day about that too. But anyone on any of the cruises can learn about that. I want to go on to how you're setting up in the UK, Brazil Conversa. Now, what is it? And why do you want to set it up? Why is it important?
Well, when I left Brazil in 2013, I remember saying to people that there's one thing I hadn't done, which was trying to set up a forum where people who were interested in UK and Brazil could get together and talk, you know, between themselves, frankly, without media attribution, if you like, about the issues that we both face. and it will be a chance for people to, network a bit and so on. So I started this up. I think 2015 was the first one. I started in 2014, and in those days it was relatively easy to raise money for these sort of things. So I did it, and I had someone to help me with the logistics, and it's managed to keep going. So we've done some in Britain and some in Brazil, and we've just had one in Oxford, which was great. Now I've handed it over to Canning House, where I'm the deputy chair. Canning House is a UK body, a bit like the think tanks that you have in Washington, D.C. for people who are listening to it. But this one focuses just on UK and Latin America. And so I don't go around doing the fundraising anymore, which is too much like hard work. And so just turn up as the old founder, really. But it's
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, ordinary people who before and now might not have thought of going to South America. It is, after all, a very long way away. But now you can cruise there, of course, and you can cruise from there to the Antarctic. I mean, it's going to become more and more of a tourist destination, and therefore more of a business destination for all sorts of people.
Well, I hope so. It's certainly a wonderful place to visit. I mean, actually, I'm doing a Viking cruise in the autumn there, which starts in Barcelona and goes down to Casablanca, and then goes over to 3 ports in Brazil. Goes to Recife, Salvador, and Rio before ending in Buenos Aires. And I've done other cruises involving Brazil as well, including going up the Amazon. So it has a lot to offer, I think, for the tourist. Of course, you only get a glimpse, but I think Brazil's worth even a glimpse.
It sounds brilliant. You're not really very retired then, are you?
Oh well, I don't have to put on a suit and go to work every morning, so that's good. But I do various things, and that's the cruises. I do 2 cruises a year basically, and unlike a lot of other people who cruise, I do a different place every time, so I have to write new lectures, which is the one challenge.
And we'll see. Well, actually, this is one of your photos, I think. I can't tell which ship it is there, and I can't even tell where it is.
No, it was. I think it was in St. Thomas, that one actually.
Oh, lovely.
I do like, as everyone does, cruising around the Caribbean. It's lovely. And wherever I go, I tend to take a photo of the ship from way off. And actually, it doesn't really matter which ship it is, because the great thing is, as a cruise lecturer with Viking ships, is that when you get on, you know exactly where everything is, because they're all built exactly. Well, not quite exactly the same, but more or less the same. Obviously, the newer ones have planetarium on them, but that's different. But otherwise, you know where the dining areas are, you know where the Star Theatre is, and so on, which I find really reassuring.
And after a really long journey, you know where the bar is, your favourite one, and you can go straight there and get something on ice. I know your work as a diplomat all over the world has been recognised in so many ways. You've got lots of letters after your name. One of them, I think, of which you must be very proud. You were made a commander of the most distinguished order of St. Michael and St. George. That was back in '96. That's an interesting one historically, isn't it?
It is, but although the history is a bit lost in, actually, as it happens, I was at a meeting yesterday. They had they do a sort of annual thing at the Foreign Office, and there was a meeting, and there was Baroness Ashton, who used to be the High Representative of the European Union doing foreign policy, gave a talk there. She's now the sort of overarching person in the order. But what I really like about the order is that they've refreshed it with some new kinds of people. So they're not all diplomats or people who've been involved in foreign diplomacy in some way. I really like the fact that Daniel Craig has been made one, and of course the person who wrote the books about Bond, Ian Fleming, was also CNG, because he, as you probably know, was much involved with the intelligence services during the war and afterwards. So it's quite nice to be involved with an order of chivalry which has those 2 grand names in it, as well as a lot of rather boring diplomats like me.
No, it's brilliant. Thank you so much for telling us just a little of your career there. There is so much more to talk to you about, but we'd be running right over time if I kept you any longer. However, as you said, you're doing more cruises and more talks, so we'll all have a chance to hopefully bump into you and ask you more. Thank you for giving me at least over an hour of your time, Alan. It's been great to meet you, if only virtually.
Been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there you are. Thank you very much for watching again. I told you you'd find him interesting. That's Alan Charlton. Watch out for him on board. And if you do bump into him, make sure that you cover some of his Washington career, because there's some really wonderful stories from that. We just didn't have time to go into them all. So from me, Anne Diamond, until we meet again, have a wonderful week.